Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reserve Seating. We are back with a Same Title Showdown episode where we talk about two completely different movies that just happen to share the same title. So we're being joined this week by a good friend of mine and a very special guest, Mr. Leo Brady from amovieguy.com. Leo, say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody. This is a long time coming. I'm so excited to be here with you both today.
Same
Yeah,
here.
thanks for joining us. We're excited to have you here too. So we're going to talk about the Love Lies Bleeding of 2008, and that is Twilight.
Now, what is everyone's relationship to Twilight in general? Because we're all of similar ages. What's the sort of the vibe, the general vibe when it comes to Twilight? Lou, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so never read the books,
Hmm?
never had understood or heard of what they were when the movies started to come out. And when they were arriving in theaters was when I first started dating my current wife, Christina. So she introduced me to it,
Right.
and I saw them all in the theaters with her. We went on like every date night we could have to see the Twilight movies. And I was immediately not a fan of them. I just found them to be cheesy and over the top.
Hmm?
There's a lot of odd narrative choices that are made in these movies, and I have to admit, I was one of the few people that didn't really ever think Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart would become who they are today.
Yeah, I was far too embarrassed to see any of these in theaters. But I was aware of the phenomenon and I was curious enough at the time to see the first three Twilight movies. But I saw Twilight '08 and I saw New Moon as Netflix rentals, and I liked them more than I thought that I would. There were things in it that I enjoyed, particularly the soundtracks. I thought those were really good and they still kind of stand up. But yeah, I was never like anti Twilight or anti Robert Pattinson or Kristen Stewart. I was just kind of more indifferent. I would definitely roll my eyes at there was a lot of like horror events like in Chicago, like we would have like the Music Box Massacre, and then during a break somebody would be like, we're raffling off a Twilight New Moon poster, and whoever wins it can set it on fire in the alley and stuff. And I used to just be like, these guys are mouth breather
Grow
losers.
up.
But like,
Yeah. I had two basic kind of looks at it. So like, oh wait, I didn't see the movie in theaters, but I remember the book coming out. My thing was I was a Buffy kid. I was a huge Buffy the Vampire Slayer kid, and also I was very into True Blood around this time. I had friends who were super into True Blood, and they got me into it. So the whole sort of the modern vampire lore, like it had kind of like it was a big part of my life at that point, you know what I mean? And when I saw this coming in, I was definitely very defensive. I mean, like you, Leo, I remember being kind of like, ah, this is not complex or interesting. They're not doing cool things with it. This is so, but largely I was just being that shitty gatekeeper male that we've now sort of made into a genre of person and try to decided to move on from.
Right.
This is also a few years after this is around the time I started teaching. And I started to warm up to them because I'm an English teacher, and so a lot of it was like, well, at least the kids are reading, you know what I mean? Like, so I had two sort of like ways of looking at it. Definitely like defensive kind of Buffy fan, genre fan, but then also like growing into my career at the time, being like, all right, you know what? Like, I guess it's good. It's they're not for me, but they're for somebody. And if that somebody gets into this thing, it's the same way we talk about gateway horror or gateway action or whatever. So I'm definitely of two minds about it. And it's been years, of course, since I watched it. Like you, Adam, I don't think I ever watched all the movies. Um, but I'll just start out by saying, just opinion wise, I had a ton of fun watching it this time. I really did, and we'll talk about why. But
In the beginning, I just was kind of like really frustrated with it and angry with a lot of the choices that they were making to let him be this bad boy without even like giving us a reason, right? Let Pattinson's character, he's like the bad boy. We're supposed to think he's the bad boy, but we never see him really do anything. And I feel like the movie wants us to sort of like pick up the subtext more than we can, especially for somebody like me who was like a newbie when the first time I saw it. But I will admit that I think it's better than like watching it at this time period than
Yes.
it was watching it the first time. I still don't think it's really a very good movie because I think they drag out this sort of temptation for her without getting to the root of him being a vampire and getting to the it feels like this sort of teenage romance that honestly would be better suited if they actually like dove into it being almost like an R-rated sort of movie about
Sure.
like forbidden love or like I think about a movie like Ginger Snaps that
Yeah.
where they get that sort of teenage angst better, get it right. This movie feels like it's desperately wanting to like let go of itself and it doesn't get there.
I think part of the appeal of the movie is that it's for mostly women, but um teenagers who are older, who are like being nostalgic for their first crushes that they would furiously write about in a diary when they were 12. It's like sort of a time capsule piece of that. And then also it's just kind of like a throwback. It's no different than like a 50s greaser teenage programmer movie. It's
Totally.
just that, but modernized. And when I say I kind of liked it sort of outside of the movie, is we're so familiar with Robert Pattinson and his career and Kristen Stewart and her career and how savvy they are and how talented they are and adventurous they are. And watching them perform this material is like almost avant-garde.
Yeah.
It's like watching like Kristen Stewart is honoring the material. I don't think she's ever making fun of it, but she's just so much cooler than like what this is. So the text of it is like ridiculous, but seeing like how talented of an actor she is and what she can do with it is really interesting. And Robert Pattinson, I think at the time it was more like, I don't know if I buy this Robert Pattinson guy. I don't know if he's as cool or as suave,
Bobby.
yeah, or as suave as we're being told that he is. But now I watch it almost like he's Tom Hardy in Venom, where
Yeah.
he's like
Exactly.
making fun of the performance without like making fun of the performance, if you know what I mean.
There's an archness to the performances. There's the artifice of the movie. Like I think when we were younger, we were watching it. And maybe I speak for myself, just like somebody who was being asked, an immature person being asked to consider this as a legitimate genre piece and being
Right.
like, no, this doesn't fit, this doesn't work. Now I'm watching it, in my late 30s and just feeling so much nostalgia for that time in all of our lives. Like, because it really is, I mean, again, I may just be speaking for myself here, and it's just definitely a certain kind of person, and it speaks to kids of divorce and only children and all these things. But that first time you fall in love, it is the end of the world. It is the most important thing that's ever happened to anybody ever. And if you let it, it can totally shape your whole personality and lead to all kinds of good and bad things and all that. I
Yeah.
just had so much fun thinking about like watching the film and be like, these are space aliens. These characters do not act the way that human beings act. But
Right.
that's how it feels. That's how, I mean, and as somebody who works with teenagers, that's how they are. Like,
Yeah.
this is exactly what it's like.
By the end of it, I was like, okay, this movie finally has figured itself out when after like it's been revealed that they're vampires, after she's like all of a sudden starts to be getting hunted by these other vampires.
Right.
Like that's where I was just like, okay, now this movie finally understands what it's supposed to be. If it didn't drag so long with the forbidden romance stuff, it
Sure.
might have actually been a more accepted movie, at least for a lot of other film goers at the time. And it wouldn't just be for certain teenagers that had a affection for the material. I do think the one thing that I certainly noticed was Pattinson and Stewart, like, obviously as they grew as actors, this is like the first time I've actually seen them have to like really work hard at it, like to like make the material work. And
Yeah.
like now it feels like what they do is just so effortless that it's almost just like natural.
I love the scale of the movie because it's not Harry Potter or the Hunger Games, where it's like this giant world building thing. It's like a very specific Pacific Northwest vibe. The color palette is very specific.
Yeah.
It just is sort of it all feels like somebody's memory of like first love, and I like that aspect of it. Okay, so we are going to talk about Robert Benton's Twilight from 1998 right now. It is a noir. Um,
Sure.
there's a Paul Newman plays a private detective. He's friends with a wealthy, powerful movie star couple played by Gene Hackman and Susan Sarandon. I'll say this about Twilight to start us off. I just couldn't get the image out of my head that Clint Eastwood was sitting in a movie theater watching this, pissed that this was not a Clint Eastwood movie.
Why is Eastwood not even in this?
This is the most Clint Eastwood, non-Clint Eastwood movie ever made.
Does Paul Newman feel bored in this? Does he feel a
Paul
little
Newman
bored?
feels tired and bored.
He's a little sleepy in this, isn't he?
Yeah, he's only got a few left, it feels
I mean,
like.
the movie's called Twilight, but I don't think, I think he took
Yeah.
it a little bit, yeah.
Well, that's why, like, it's the Clint Eastwood thing, because in Clint Eastwood's movies, like most recently, Cry Macho, he's like 98 years old and
Right.
has his khakis up to his nipples, but every girl wants to fuck him. And that's Paul Newman in this movie. It's like,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
and you know that it's appealing to the, I don't say this as a slight, but I'm saying it as a fact. It appeals to the AARP crowd because they're
Sure.
just like, how hot is Stockard Channing? And I just am sitting there, I'm like, I have to think about this. Hold on.
This, as I think I said on Letterboxd, this movie smells like Brute Cologne and peppermint candy. I mean, it's just like, it is this for the 65 and over set, and it rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a total Werther's original pick.
The cast, the bench is deep. It
Oh,
goes
right.
deep. And when midway through the movie, I was just like, basically saying to myself, this is a Clint Eastwood movie made during a Clint Eastwood time. But yet the most invigorating thing was when Giancarlo Esposito shows up as Ruben.
Yeah.
And I was saying to myself, that buddy comedy movie with Paul Newman and Giancarlo Esposito is a better movie than what we were stuck with.
It's like a 3-point shooter where when they're chucking up threes, and when I say that, I mean 3-minute scenes with Paul Newman and James Garner, 3-minute scenes
Yes.
with Paul Newman and Giancarlo Esposito. It is swishes,
Yep.
nothing but net, scoring points. But anytime it stops to do anything plot centric, it is just kind of it's slow. It's not particularly interesting. The way they get to the conclusion is not as interesting as what the conclusion is. So
Right.
it's sort of like the plot isn't being served by the storytelling.
Right.
It's just kind of a cottage cheese and a cantaloupe kind of movie.
And it's one of those movies where when James Garner gets in halfway through the movie and you're like, oh, okay, I know where this is going. Like, I know you don't have James Garner play this character unless XYZ is going to happen. And not to spoil the movie for anybody, but like the film noir elements, the voiceover and the sort of, I went through the guy's pockets and found a note that took me to there and I talked to that guy. The movie kind of gets bored in and out with that. It's sort of like it's sleepy when it comes to its plot mechanics as well.
I do admire that Reese Witherspoon is such a brat throughout this movie, because it's like this dynamic of like Hackman and Sarandon are her parents, and she's like the bratty child of movie stars. And I do like that they're just put out completely by like any type of inconvenience. So like with her, I would think on one hand, logical side of me, non-movie brain me, is like Reese Witherspoon, spoiler, at the beginning of the movie in the prologue, shoots Paul Newman in the upper thigh, which becomes a running joke through the movie.
Yeah.
And you would think like, oh no, I shot that guy. At the very least, I'll be nice to him now. But it's like every time he shows up in her house as a house guest, it's like a reminder of her mistake. And she just resents him more and more and more for that. So I like that.
Newman, I loved his. I actually like, even though he has his sleepy moments, he also has these other parts where he just comes to life and he's kind of like, he's always calling somebody like pal, buddy,
Allie? Yeah.
yeah, darling, things of that nature. He just feels like a sort of a veteran who's been there before. And that's just like right up his alley of old films that he's done, but this is sort of, as you guys said, you can tell he much like the script, he gets not as interested in what movie he's in as the story goes along.
I think this movie makes more sense if Robert Redford's playing the Paul Newman part.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. For as good as the cast is, yeah. I think
Yeah.
that Newman is just a little sleepy.
You need sexy, and he feels like it's an effort.
I was glad that I got a chance to watch this one. It's
Oh,
like
sure.
I appreciate these 90s movies, as you guys said, like these 90s noirs, and I appreciate that this was an option for the adults to see at the theater that weekend.
Movie for
Uh,
grown-ups.
yeah, like this movie just screamed to me the type of movie that when I was like a teenager in high school, I would like wake up early on a weekend and my mom would have been up at like 4:30, 5 in the morning and already watching like something like Twilight, because it's just like the type of movie that she would just get caught up in and be like, all right, I watched it, and that's
That sounds
It
awesome.
seems, I don't know if adults would have seen this in theaters in '98 though, because it came out the same day as U.S. Marshals, baby, and
oh
that's where all the adults were.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And Tommy Lee Jones would have killed it in this movie.
Yeah.
All right, so Leo, since you're our guest, Twilight 2008 or Twilight 1998, which are you picking?
Ah, man, after this like long conversation, you guys are making it a little bit more difficult for me. My initial choice at the beginning, I'm gonna stick with it, was Twilight 1998, only because I love seeing actors of all sorts. I think the deep cast helps it out a lot, and I just love seeing people pop up in certain roles like this.
Yeah.
You can never go wrong with even a sleepy Paul Newman is a better, than most movies that I have seen, even by today's standards. So I'm taking Twilight 1998, even though I found a little bit more of a new appreciation for Twilight 2008.
I totally understand what you're saying. I'm going Twilight '08 though, because I have been in those situations. I have not yet been in a sleepy septuagenarian film noir adventure yet, and I'm sure I will be at some point. I fully plan to. I've got the Reese's; they're in my pockets. They're the Werthers, wherever they are. I fully plan to do that one day. I'm not there yet, so I get a little bit more out of the sheer audacity of Twilight '08.
Yeah, and I agree with Rob. I'll pick Twilight 2008, but I also fully expect that F this movie will one day end with Emmett Walsh shooting at me in an apartment. So, Leo, before we get going, tell us about your website and your podcast and where we can find you on the internet.
Yeah, so my website is amovieguy.com. That's where you can get all of my movie reviews, all of my interviews, and film festival coverage that I do. This week, I have a brand new interview with actor Ian McShane. I talked to him about his film American Star. So that was pretty cool. He's in the John Wick series.
Yeah.
And and then for podcasts, you can catch me on Scene Stealers. I have a heist movie podcast, and we have, as we talked a little bit about before this, we have our 50th episode coming up this week, and it's a Rob DiCrisino favorite, In the Town, with Ben
Nice.
Affleck.
Yes.
So we are rolling on that podcast, and yeah, that's where you can get all of my stuff. You can follow me on Twitter at Leo's a Movie Guy, and then on Instagram and all those other sites, it's just a movie guy. So that's the place to catch me. And
Awesome.
I really appreciate being with you guys today.
Yeah, thanks for coming. We really loved having you, and I love your reviews and all the work that you're doing over at your website. So, congratulations also on episode number 50. That's a
Yeah.
hell of a benchmark or
Yeah.
milestone. Milestone, benchmark. Shooting
Yep.
threes. So we'll be back next week. We are starting Mike Month, a tribute to Mr. Mike Pomero. Mike is the DJ. He's picking the tunes.
Yeah.
His first movie that we're going to be discussing is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. It is the documentary American Movie. So until next time.
These seats sparkle in the sunlight.
Boom.
I look like I thought about that before, but it was like
That was pretty good. That was right on.
yeah.